All right, thank you for the tremendous show of character in breaking up your conversations and coming back. A few more sessions to go. I'm happy to introduce Jochen Gebauer, who asked me to offer absolutely no biographical information about himself at all, so I won't. He'll be talking about the belief in the existence of true altruism.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. The title gives it away. I want to talk about true altruism. It's a very old topic, but contrary to what has been researched before, I don't want to talk about whether true altruism exists or not, but I want to talk about whether lay people believe in the existence of true altruism. But let's start with a definition first. Daniel Batson defines true altruism as helping directed toward the ultimate goal of enhancing other people's welfare. And I bolded this ultimate goal thing because that's really important. In this sense, altruism becomes a motivational construct. And the question then really is whether altruism is part of the human motivational repertoire or not. And as I said, this is a very old question that has been addressed by philosophy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, believed that humans can be truly altruistic, and David Hume believed that they cannot be. Also find controversy about this issue in economy. Smith and Bentham disagreed on the issue. At least this is what Daniel Batson writes in his famous book, The Altruism Question. In sociology, we have Comte, the person who came up with the term altruism, and Mill, who also took different positions. And for psychologists, most important, of course, Daniel Batson arguing that true altruism can exist, whereas Bob Cialdini argues that it cannot. Okay, so as I said, this is, and as you can see here, this is an old question. It spans across different disciplines, and we did not want to join in this discussion for the reason that, as you can see, it's a very difficult question to answer. There is no agreement about the outcome. Instead, we wanted to ask a related question. Want to find out what lay people believe about the existence of true altruism. And this is what comes out when you Google typical German and typical American. And for some reason, they look really similar to me. Nonetheless, I think it's worth looking at this question across cultures. And so far, we looked at it in the US and in Germany. But an important endeavor for future research, of course, is to look at that, for example, in East Asia. All right, so we had three research questions. The first one simply concerns the prevalence of this belief. How do lay people answer the altruism question? Are lay people naive Rousseaus or are they naive Humes? Do lay people believe that altruism exists or that it does not? I found this question already, although it really concerns only looking at a mean of a self-report scale, quite interesting, because within our research team we had heavy debates about whether it's worth to conduct such research at all. One member of the research team said that obviously no one can believe in the existence of true altruism, and another collaborator of mine said that probably there will be 99% of people believing in the in true altruism. So we were actually quite afraid of whether we would get individual differences in this belief in one way or the other, which obviously is needed if you are interested in consequences of this belief. That is the second research question, the consequences. And specifically for this meeting now, we're interested in who possesses more moral character. Are it the naive Rousseaus or the naive Humes? And just from our feeling, we thought it should be the naive Rousseaus. Those who believe that true altruism exists, that they should actually help more, they should show more behavioral signs of moral character. We also had some thought about why this should be the case. Why are lay beliefs linked to moral character? And our argument was that naive Rousseaus might enjoy helping more than naive Humes. And this was just to foreshadow what you will see in the next 20 minutes. But now let's start with a prevalence question first. Okay, we did what most personality psychologists would do when you wonder about an explicit belief. We construct a self-report scale. We termed it the belief in the existence of true altruism, or beta scale. And we first came up with 16 candidate items. We humans have the potential to act with pure altruism without expecting any personal benefits for ourselves. It's one example item that made it in the final scale. Human beings are fully capable of genuinely loving and caring about other people without expecting anything in return. Another item. Then there are also reverse-coded or negatively coded items. All our human concern for others is motivated by underlying selfish reasons. Or everything humans do for other people is motivated by self-interest of one kind or another. All these questions were answered on a 7-point rating scale ranging from 1, absolutely wrong, to 7, absolutely right. And this borrows from a lot of past research on the belief in the existence of God or the belief in the existence of free will. They all use similar scales and similar procedures. Okay. Basically, to validate the scale, we use standard methods in personality psychology. First, we run a so-called exploratory factor analysis on 149 Americans and 226 Germans separately. What this method really does is it tries to find clusters of responses within the 16 candidate items and tells us which item is a good indicator of each of the clusters that we find. And what we find is that 2 factors emerge from these 16 candidate items. The second factor consisted of solely negatively scored items, high responses meaning egoism. And we attributed this to method variance and argued that, in fact, then when we ignore the method variance and force these 2 dimensions into a single dimension, we have the appropriate measure. And using this, we found 5 positively scored items, all have high factor loadings on this first factor, and 5 negatively scored items, so that our final scale at the end consisted of 10 items, 5 positively scored, 5 negatively scored. We tried to validate the one-factor structure using a confirmatory factor analysis on different participants, again in America and in Germany. And we found that this one-factor structure fit the data quite well. So all you need to know, now we arrived at 10 items, which we think possesses a good factor structure to answer our substantial questions. So this is the prevalence that we find. And what you can see, first of all, when you look at the means, that's this M thing, across all across all 4 samples, we find that the mean is somewhat above the theoretical midpoint of the scale. The theoretical midpoint of the scale, which ranges from 1 to 7, would be 4. So 4.8 on average is somewhat above that, meaning that people tend to believe more that true altruism exists rather than it does not exist. But perhaps more important, what you also see that there is considerable variation. The standard deviations are relatively large. So what we have is we have people who strongly believe in the absence of true altruism. We have the naive Humes, but we also have people who believe in the existence of true altruism, and then we have many people in between. Okay. So to draw a quick interim summary, I'm going to do this now for the rest of my talk, just because I want to make the message very clear, since we're already at the end at the conference and it might be difficult for you to follow. So how do lay people answer the altruism question then? Are lay people naive Rousseaus or naive Humes? Well, they tend to be more towards naive Rousseaus, but more importantly, we find evidence consistent with considerable individual differences regarding this lay belief. Okay, so let's look at consequences. Who possesses more moral character, the naive Rousseaus or the naive Humes? And this, to answer this question, we of course need to measure moral character, and we think that a very appropriate way to do this is to base this on behavioral measures. At the same time, we think that it's important to measure moral character broadly, not only in a specific domain, but across several domains. And so we wanted to borrow measures from philosophy, economy, sociology, and psychology. The first measure that we had was a retrospective self-report measure. There were 20 items. It's the Russian Altruism scale. It's very frequently used in psychology. 20 items, one item corresponding to a helpful behavior, and participants have to indicate how frequently they perform this behavior relative to their opportunity. And we administered this scale in all of our studies that we have so far, and that is studies 1 to 7. We also borrowed from sociology using a social engagement self-report measure. This is a dichotomous scale. Simply, you have to indicate whether you engage in social activities, pro-social activities or not. 10 items, highly reliable, and we use this scale in studies 3 to 7. So as you can see, with each study, we added another indicator to assess moral character more and more broadly and more comprehensively. From philosophy, we used moral dilemmas. I'm happy to talk about them later. If you're interested, they have been used before. They worked very well. And perhaps the best indicators indeed seem to come from economy, because they use actual behavioral measures, the well-known dictator game in which you have to split up a certain amount of money into 2 piles, and you give one pile to another player and you keep the other pile for yourself, and the amount you give away is an indicator of helpfulness or moral character. There's also another game called the trust game, which is a variant of the dictator game. If you're interested, I can tell you more about it. The outcomes of these 2 games are highly correlated. Now, because we stress the importance of actual behavior so much, we also wanted to complement our psychological measure with another psychological measure that focuses more on actual behavior. At the end of our study 7, which is the largest study, including 7 measures of moral character, we asked participants whether they would be willing to volunteer in another study, in an online study, for a PhD student who has no money to pay participants. And we indeed had this online study. We sent out links to these participants, and we checked whether they would actually participate. And if they did not participate in the study, we penalized their scores. So this is a real self-report, a real behavioral measure of moral character. And finally, participants in the 7th study, they got quite a lot of money by participating, as you can imagine, since these are time-consuming measures that we administered here. So they got this money, and we asked them whether they are willing to donate at least part of it to a charity. Okay, so as I said then, depending on the study, our measures range from 1 measure up to 7 measures. And in all these cases, what we did is we wanted to come up with a common general factor of moral character, which is largely behaviorally based. And we did so by borrowing procedure from intelligence research. In intelligence research, people use a G-factor approach, and that is exactly what we did as well. So we ran exploratory factor analysis. We found that a single factor occurs in all these cases, and we saved this single factor as a general indicator for moral character, which is highly behaviorally based. Okay, so now that was a long method section, and that's a very short result section. As you can see, this G character row here, that basically shows the correlation between the belief in the existence of true altruism and moral character. And you can see that in all these studies, we find a positive relation, meaning that people who believe in the existence of true altruism actually behave more morally. find that in the US, we find this in Germany. So this is a very robust result. And you also find this when you exclude all the self-report measures. So self-report bias is really not a concern. We also have measures tapping self-enhancement, measures tapping social desire responding. They generally do not correlate, or maybe generally is a too diffuse word, they never correlate with these things. Okay, so quick interim summary. Who possesses more moral character? Evidence suggests that it is indeed the naive Rousseaus and not the naive Humes. But why is this the case? As I said before, our hypothesis was that naive Rousseaus may enjoy helping more than naive Humes. Of course, this is an assumption, and one should wonder then, why should naive Rousseaus enjoy helping more than naive Humes? And to answer this assumption or question, we have to talk about an issue, which is that in general, when people believe that humans can be altruistic, they equate that with a belief that humans are good, fundamentally good. When humans believe that humans cannot be altruistic, they equate that with the idea that humans are fundamentally bad. And that's a universal. We find that within our participants, so lay people share this view, but you also find this view in philosophy and theology, so forth. The only exception is Friedrich Nietzsche, who argues just for the opposite, saying that it's a good thing to be egoistic and not to be altruistic. You can see a great review on this issue in Batson's The Altruism Question book. Okay, but when we basically subscribe to this altruism is good, egoism is bad idea, and see that this is also in the heads of our participants, which our studies show, additionally to what I present here, what basically follows from this is that believers in the existence of true altruism should derive more pleasure from helping. And they should do so for two reasons. First of all, they should see their own helping as more noble. Second of all, they should see other humans who possess the capacity of great altruism as more worthy, and therefore also as more worthy of help. It follows then that because believers in true altruism derive more pleasure from helping, that they should actually help more, they should show more character. And that's very much in line with Tompkins' idea that pleasure or positive affect in general serves as a motor for behavior. Evolution gave us the capacity to feel positive because we approach things that we like, so pleasure as a motor of behavior. Okay, to depict this, this is the idea. Believers in the existence of true altruism gain more pleasure from helping, and because they know it, they will help more. We assessed pleasure from helping with a 5-item scale. Very face-valid items. Supporting other people makes me very happy, and similar items. Okay, this is what we find. We address this question in studies 5 to 7. And in all these studies, we find that believers in the existence of true altruism indeed report that they gain more pleasure from helping than non-believers do. We also find that pleasure from helping, replicating past research, is related to showing more character or to be more helpful. And when you run these mediation analyses, you find that this indirect path from the belief in the existence of true altruism via pleasure from helping to character indeed is significant. Okay, then summary: why are lay beliefs why are lay beliefs linked to moral character? We think that at least in part this is the case because naive Rousseaus enjoy helping more than naive Humes. Okay, but so far we're only 9 months into the project, so there is 1 year of data collection to come. And I would like to tell you a bit what we're doing next. First of all, this 7th study, which included these 7 measures of moral character, this is indeed a longitudinal study with 3 waves, allowing us to test our model longitudinally to establish causality better than we have been able so far. So in other words, we can really get more indication of whether this causal chain is really running from the belief in true altruism over pleasure from helping to moral character. At the same time, we want to complement this longitudinal approach with experiments, and we have not really set our mind yet on the appropriate experiment, but Cialdini ran a quite clever study, I think, which I just recently came across. In this study, he gave participants a placebo pill and told them that this pill is going to make them emotionally numb. And what he finds is that participants are less willing to help after taking this pill because they anticipate that they're not gaining pleasure from helping anymore. And we could do a very similar thing. We could have a replication condition similar to studies 1 to 7, in which we would expect that believers in true altruism help more, show more moral character than believers in the non-believers here. And if our process model indeed is correct, we would expect that this effect should be drastically reduced in an experimental condition where participants would get this pill, leading to a smaller effect here. So to draw a 9-month summary, we looked at the prevalence of the lay belief in the existence of true altruism, and we found that more people believe that altruism exists than people do not believe in it, but that there are clear and important individual differences. We looked at the consequences, and we found that naive Rousseaus possess more moral character than naive Humes do. And we tried to explain this via a mechanism. Specifically, we argued and found evidence that naive Rousseaus would enjoy helping more and therefore actually help more. And with this, thank you very much.
Yeah, I was wondering if, I don't know if this would be part of the pleasure hypothesis or a separate additional hypothesis, but could it be that part of the reason that betas help more is also they expect to receive help more? So I wonder if in the dictator game, for example, they're giving more because they think, well, if the other person's a dictator, they would be giving more.
Yeah. So we took much care that this cannot be an alternative explanation. It could be that this would perhaps in real life even increase this effect if it is increased in real life. But as the designs were made here, such strategic exchange orientation considerations do not play.
Yeah. I guess I didn't mean like concrete expectations, but just
right.
If you believe people are altruistic, if you believe that if, hypothetically, if the roles were reversed, they would give you more. And so that's part of your motivation for giving more.
Okay, yeah. So we could, there are self-report scales of exchange orientation which we could include there and see. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. My first one was about the explanation, the hypothesis that it's the belief in true altruism is being caused by the extra pleasure that they take, or it's being caused. Tell me again what your hypothesis was. The belief in true altruism is
the effect of the belief in true altruism is explained by the pleasure gains.
Is explained by the pleasure gained, yeah. So when you were presenting the original data, my first thought was, well, the belief in true altruism might be being caused by the fact that these people are aware of their own motives, and they see their own motives as being more altruistic.
Absolutely.
Right? And then, so that it's the explanation might actually be running the opposite direction.
Yes. This is why this slide exists. So this, it could well be that this pleasure gain is a pure side effect. So people are really motivated to help others, and they gain pleasure from it as a side effect, but they, and that does not further motivate their helping. Although this would speak a bit against conditioning effects, which we certainly know that humans follow such rules, because if you gain pleasure, we know that humans start wanting this thing more. So it makes, in my opinion, much sense to argue that this is a mediating process, even causally. But yes, we need to run experiments, and we need to run longitudinal studies to know about that, definitely.
Yeah, and my second question was, I'm not even sure if this is a question so much as just me registering my surprise. If it does turn out that the believers in true altruism take more pleasure, this seems very surprising to me, right? Because one of the standard reasons for thinking that there is no such thing as true altruism is that, look, people take pleasure in doing good things for other people, right? So you'd think that the people who are taking the most pleasure in doing the good things for other people would be the ones who are most sensitive to this argument against true altruism, because they see, oh, but it's nice and it feels good to do things for other people. And so it turns out maybe that's my ulterior motive, right? Maybe I think I've got good motives, but I take all this pleasure in doing it. So I'm sort of struck by the unexpectedness of this conclusion if it does turn out that this is the case, right? You think that the people who aren't taking pleasure in doing good things for others as much would be more inclined to believe that there's true altruism, right?
So yeah, it's counterintuitive perhaps, but it's also provocative, I guess, and ironic if you want even. Daniel Batson writes a lot about moral hypocrisy nowadays, and I would not go as far as saying that these people are moral hypocrites, but it is. I think it goes in this direction that people might not have enough self-insight that they think that they help for truly altruistic reasons. They gain the pleasure. They don't notice that they do it for that reason. I think it's in the realm of possibility. We'll have to figure this out.
Marie?
So that was sort of exactly my comment and question too. But I thought that one interesting thing though is how we ask people about true altruism. So looking at the beta scale at the beginning, it doesn't actually define what the personal benefits are. And so in my head, I wasn't sure whether pleasure and enjoyment would be something that counted as a personal benefits or wouldn't. So depending on how you define it, I could be a resource.
Absolutely. We have it in there, yeah. So these are 10 items, and I cannot recall the exact number, 6 of them or so, or 5 of them actually concern pleasure or include pleasure. Yeah, but this is, of course, crucial. If this would not be the case, the problem. Yeah.
So Ty and shoot back over here.
Along the same lines, it'd be really compelling if in future works in here you can include other potential explanations and show that it is pleasure or what the relative impact. Because my assumption, I think like some of the other questions means is, this seems very hedonistic to me as an explanation where if you could compare that to concern for other, just general trust in humanity or other-oriented concerns, and to show that if you put both of these in, they explain unique things. And I'm curious if you have plans to do that, or if you can do that, kind of compare mechanisms as opposed to just showing evidence of just one.
Well, we have done it, in fact.
Oh, okay.
So empathy does very similar things than this pleasure thing, but empathy is highly correlated with self-other overlap. So I didn't want to bring this up here, but when all the data is in and the longitudinal data is there, we'll have to try to tease this apart. There is research basically showing that by Maynor and Cialdini and others, that the empathy effect that increases helping goes back on an more increased self-other overlap. And what we find is really that this gaining pleasure, empathy, and self-other overlap all load on a single factor. So there is very high overlap, and it's my feeling that it's really this approach of positive emotions or this avoidance of negative emotions that stands between these two variables.
So my question, I think, regards the neither the naive Russians nor the naive Humeans, maybe let's call them naive Kantians or whatever, the 3-day Russians, 4-day Humeans, something like that. So here's the question. The question is, from your study, could you see the consequences of their behavior? Could you measure their moral behavior, and what if? And then how would their beliefs be correlated with that behavior, right? So would there be a positive correlation between their beliefs and their altruism, their altruistic action? I don't know if this question makes any sense.
Unfortunately, I did not understand it.
Okay.
So what do you want to correlate with moral behavior?
So moral behavior, so I'm still going back to your four measures, the psychological, sociological.
Right.
Are there ways for you to measure the correlation between this intermediate group, the naive Kantians? How do they perform on this G character factor?
So you're asking whether we have kind of a curvilinear relation or something. Well, it's a very linear relation that we get, that the more you believe in a true altruism, the more you will help. And when you do not believe at all, you help the least. And with increasing belief, you gradually help more. So those people you talk about in the middle would help to a medium degree.
Do you have the statistics for just the volunteering in another study? So does belief in altruism predict a behavioral measure that you have?
So what we did is we used this measure, which is only behavior, that measure, which is only behavior, and this measure, which is only behavior. And when we ignore all the self-report measures, we find the same results. It's a bit weaker, but it's the same results. And my reason for my belief is that it's weaker because it's more special. These others are broader because we do not find any relations with self-enhancement or with social desirable responding with our measure.
It'd be interesting to see the statistics just for the behavioral measures alone.
Yeah, so it was here 0.21 if you only use the behavioral measure. So if you cut out all these measures basically and only use one.
Yeah, so my question had to do with kind of the chicken versus the eggy kind of thing that a couple of people were talking about, which is when you showed the mediational diagram, it seemed to me much more likely and intuitive that you would just reverse the arrow with the liking of helping other people, where some people feel really good when they help people and kind of shameful or sad when they don't help people, and that makes sense as the proximal cause of the helping. But it also seemed to me that it's very likely the cause of the beliefs in the true nature of altruism, right? So that you realize you feel horrible if you didn't give any money in the dictator game or something, and by kind of projecting and assuming other people are kind of like you think that other people probably do too, and so you assume that they're kind of altruistic on the basis of that. And so I guess the more general question I have is, where do you think that these beliefs come from? Because it sort of seems like that seems like a pretty open question from the talk that you give. So
yes, that's true. First of all, this is possible, and that's why we need this longitudinal and experimental evidence. It could be self-justification, dissonance reduction, or all such processes, and they could play at least a partial role in that. As to the consequences, this is an interesting question. We have included attachment styles and so forth in the longitudinal study. I've not looked at that yet. What we have is, I hope that, yes, there it is. I did not throw it out. We have correlations with other beliefs. So true altruism, belief in God, belief in the existence of a just world and free will. And what we find, and that indeed surprised me a bit originally, is that this belief in true altruism is quite an isolated belief. So in the original proposal, and this is really consistent across 4 samples, and we have more samples now in that, I originally thought at least that with a belief in God and with religiosity, it should be substantially related because religiosity really tries to encourage true altruism, and love is kind and love is so forth, right? Attachment styles would be my best guess so far, but I don't know it.
Let's go there and then go to Mike.
So I was wondering if you would mind saying more about moral dilemmas and how you were using that. You just said moral dilemmas. If you want to know more, ask. So moral dilemmas.
Yes. I can say a bit about, well, in studies 1 and 2, we tried the trolley problem, and it basically refers back to this question we had before. And with this, we do not... Okay. So we had 3 from Hauser and colleagues. He has this homepage, and actually I cannot really recall now which it was. But these dilemmas did not correlate with this.
But the dilemmas can't. I mean, you mean the way they answered the dilemma are you assuming there's a right answer to the dilemma that you were looking for?
The answer.
Oh, what do you think is the right answer to the dilemma?
Well, I don't know. That's exactly the problem. Yeah. So it's not really tapping into moral character because it's not so clear what the right, but it does not neither positively nor negatively correlate. So it's just an independent thing, and it does not correlate with other measures of helpfulness either. So it's isolated in a way. So it does not load on the same factor than our other measures of helpfulness. So it's to dismiss, I would argue.
So in other words, whether people would flip this switch or not has no relation to whether they're helpful. That actually seems right to you, but you were expecting it would go the other way.
But we have a measure with moral dilemmas in there, and that is a different measure, and that is much more related to helpfulness. And there are 4 scenarios. In one scenario, for example, you have to imagine that you get a job offer, but you also subscribe to 1 year in Africa helping children in need, and it's your dream job, and now you have to make this decision, and if you go, the children there will not have anyone to help them for a year. So this is clearly a moral thing with a morally right or wrong answer. So there's one option you can choose. I go to Africa, so you go for to help others and.
Oh, and that's what you're saying is correlated.
That is correlated.
Okay, can I make a suggestion just from the philosophers? That's not, I don't think, for most philosophers, a true moral dilemma. Because you're suggesting you're using it in the colloquial sense of just kind of like shit luck or something. You know? Like it's a hard case or something, like doing the right thing's really hard or whatever. But a true moral dilemma is supposed to be a case where, you know, no matter what you do something blameworthy, guilt-inducing, so on and so forth. So, I mean, just, you know, so I think that was a bit confusing for me.
Okay, and what would you call this now then? So
well, I would just call that a hard case. Like, I mean, no, I'm not, I mean, like, I think I would just call that a case where doing the right thing costs something, or something like that. I mean, but it doesn't really have anything to do with moral dilemma. I mean, there's a whole technical literature on moral dilemmas that wouldn't qualify.
So my lay belief or what moral means is a bit wrong.
Well, dilemma implies like a paradox or a, yeah. I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in the mediation question of why what we think about human nature would presumably influence our own pro-social behavior and moral behavior. And I think one way of understanding it is that as human beings, we're always trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing. And one way we answer that question is, for some people, it's we're supposed to be doing what God tells us is right. That's one way people can answer the question. Another way is we're supposed to be doing what people around us are doing, so we conform to patterns. And then another answer is we're supposed to do what's natural for us as a species, like what nature built us to do. So I wonder if the connection isn't explained by the fact that people are, maybe even deliberately or with some awareness, aligning their behavior with what they think is natural, what nature has kind of predisposed them to do. Much as some people choose to eat meat, and they often will refer to the fact that, well, humans have done this for hundreds of thousands of years, so it's natural for us, our bodies are built for us. Other people eat less meat, and they make an argument that, well, it's natural because humans only ate a small amount of meat throughout our history, so they align their behavior with what they think is natural. And I wonder if that's part of the mediational.
Could well be. I never thought about this. So basically, either God or evolution has given us the capacity to be truly altruistic, thus we should help others.
And then we want to be authentic. We want to live in accord with our nature, which is a theme and a lot of thinking about how we should live.
It's very worth testing, but at the same time, for me personally, I would argue if nature or God has given us feeling good about helping, then we should also help. So, but you're right.
I think people would say the pleasure we get from it is the evidence that it is our nature.
Yeah.
And it's like we get pleasure from it because we're predisposed to do that by nature. So I don't know if I can separate those two things into two different explanations. They may be one and the same.
You could also argue that basically nature linked positive emotions to helping. So if we should do what feels good, then we should help. So you could even imagine that those who know that they gain pleasure from it, so that they're not believing in true altruism, help more. I don't know, but it depends what people think. You're right. Yeah, it's very helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Right. That's probably a good place to stop. It's 3:15. I know that it's recess time, so we'll reconvene at 3:45 right here.